I graduated from Oberlin in '75 and find myself inhabiting and co-founding a private wealth management firm focused only on sustainable and impact investing for families and individuals.
Since 2008, we're investing in the solutions businesses, the innovators, the disruptors, enabling a transition to low-carbon sustainable economy. I lived in London for the past 12 years and just moved back to the U.S. I went to Stanford undergrad and immediately out of school went down to southern Chile with a Fulbright, where I was doing community-based conservation work. That led into an early career in finance within the nonprofit sector, and ultimately looking at how to scale impact, following the capital flows to end up where I am today, where we get to deploy capital into these solutions.
30 years as an investor and investment banker. I did public-private partnership work representing the U.S. Treasury. I'm setting up the U.S.-Russia Investment Fund. 3 years ago, we set up a partnership with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Farm Credit System. We organized a $10 billion pledge to build infrastructure for clean energy and water. And since then, we've invested $3 billion of that, working with both equity and debt efforts around the country.
I've spent the last 38 years working in this space as a lawyer, litigator, as a regulator in the regional office for the EPA. My background is in law and business. And having spent 3 decades thinking about how you make change, shaming and blaming it when you move it by litigating and when you move it by advocating, it seemed that we need to bring capital market leaders into this debate. We're not going to make the change we need without bringing in the capital market. The powers there, the clouds there. Got logic on our side, facts on our side to be part of the answer moving forward.
This regenerative, integral approach to business and economics is actually happening already. The first issue is time. Oil companies have some real problems. But the one thing they do better than any industry is they think in the long term. So Shell says, we believe our portfolio is resilient under a wide range of outlooks, including the IEA's 450 scenario. However, we have no immediate plans to move to a net zero emissions portfolio over our investment horizon, 10 to 20 years. Now, you're not going to find many real investors who declare that their investment horizon is 10 to 20 years. And Shell, whether they're right or wrong, we think they're wrong, but they can declare with some confidence that the story we're talking about doesn't affect their investment horizon in 10 to 20 years. In terms of actually moving money, are we basically dependent on policy in order to cause markets to do what markets need to do? Or is there a pathway to move $1 trillion more a year prior to the policy coming?
That there's a mismatch between financing clean energy and the capital markets. The capital markets are very focused on public companies where there's a lot of disclosure, and also large-scale projects. So when you think of infrastructure, you think of roads and bridges and tunnels, transportation infrastructure. But most of the energy infrastructure is very decentralized, right? It's $1 million project somewhere for solar, or we're doing a lot of geothermal. One of our portfolio companies, there are hundreds or thousands of those projects, and the investors can't diligence those. So how do you put that together? And what we've done is partner with the government who originates those projects. The long-term nature of clean energy is very attractive to investors. They just can't execute.
Clean tech space is surprisingly a downer for investors. These are long-term projects, so there's not some boom of capital going into clean tech right now. In fact, a lot of people can't raise their next clean tech funds.
$13 billion that Generation manages isn't a public equity strategy, which does not own any fossil-based companies and has delivered up performance. It is a concentrated strategy, and it does not have to match an index, but it's been able to do that over a long time period. But where I focus, which is on the growth equity side, we launched our first fund in April of 2008, our second fund in 2014, and the funds are called Climate Solutions Fund 1 and Climate Solutions Fund 2. It was actually very popular to have Climate Solutions Fund in 2008 because we were still in the euphoria or the belief that we could put a price on carbon. An inconvenient truth had come out. There was a lot of investor engagement around climate risk, the Carbon Disclosure Project. Fast forward, 2014, very unpopular time to be raising a fund called the Climate Solutions Fund. And we thought it was an even more relevant time to be doing so. Partially because of the imperative of the transition to a low carbon economy and more sustainable business models, but partly because the opportunity set is that much more interesting. Because if you think about the cost downs that we've experienced in solar, in LED prices, in storage, but even better time to be deploying that capital. Both the quality and then the size of that pipeline has grown. Our fund is putting to work $20 to $30 million at a time in growth companies, whether it be Nest, the learning thermostat company, Solar City on the distributed solar side. In Africa, companies like Seventh Generation who are trying to get toxic chemicals out of household products, and on and on. But we're quite optimistic. But it has been unpopular for a period of time. We're starting to now see more private equity funds jump in, but they're not calling it climate or low carbon. Rather, they're calling it innovative technologies, which is actually a framing. And I think that is perhaps the right framing because it's about the future and where you want to position your assets in this future economy.
We manage about $1 billion, about 40 or 50 million of that is actually invested in generation. We started that back when there was $300 million of assets there. So one of the things that our clients and you are doing is that you're investing in companies that are taking the risk to do this work. There's too many old white guys up here like myself. Another way that this change is happening is because of your kids. And I have a bunch of kids in my family and I say to them as they're fighting for divestment, are you talking to your parents who are wealth holders because you're not going to elite schools like this and where we all graduated from and not have wealth? Are you having that conversation to change their portfolios while you're protesting appropriately for divestment? We all can vote with our dollars in our portfolios. The good news is that we can do that today in a way that our portfolios also make money. We can be investing in these sectors that are driving change and are the future. We have a small role as private people, but we vote, and our families vote, and serve on boards of directors, and our fathers and mothers are executives. People change. Institutions change in part because people change. And we have all changed over our careers. The biggest change agents in our world are women and millennials. We're up against an enormous challenge, and most of us don't understand the good news, how fast these equations are really changing. We don't get that PV is below building the coal plant. And if we interview the folks walking down the street, we're unequipped with the positive news that is transforming.
I've been running around saying we've got a $40 trillion investment opportunity / obstacle / urgency requirement, and now it's just doubled to 90 trillion. I guess it's been squished into a tighter time frame, essentially. The total market cap, meaning the value of all public companies on planet Earth, is 60 trillion. So we're talking about investing new capital greater than the entire value of every company, public company, on the Earth. This energy infrastructure is capital intensive. By definition, 90 trillion is 90 trillion. And what that means is that the cost of capital is probably the most important determinant on how fast it can be rolled out. And investors are greedy. Everyone's looking to optimize their risk-adjusted return. That's what business schools teach us to do. But are we kidding ourselves that this is not ultimately a public sector challenge? Our public sector has the lowest cost of capital on planet Earth. And on top of that, they have the ability to actually print money that has a zero cost of capital. And if we're serious about moving 90 trillion in 15 years, should we not be focused first and foremost on the public sector as the source of financing?
Whether we can get to 90 trillion in 15 years or 30 years, we need to be talking about orders of magnitude. It can't just be the public sector. It needs to be public-private partnerships. It's not just publicly traded companies, it's smaller companies. We need everybody with the right information on the right track. But I look at $1 trillion here, the money is there, the capital is there, it can be moved to get us to 2050. It has to be a public-private partnership, and so much of it is infrastructure. The investments we need to make are roads, they're water, things that cost hundreds of billions of dollars in the United States alone, and government is going to have to be part of it. Can we get to a non-fossil fuel future by 2050? I think it is going to be very hard, but I certainly know we have no choice but to do everything in our power to try and get there, and we've got to figure out a way. I think we can get there.
I think we have to reimagine the role of government. The government has stature and resources that are way beyond writing a check. They also have a role as regulator. They also have a role as a customer. The largest public-private partnership ever in the United States, you probably haven't heard of, but it's military housing. 20 years ago, the Pentagon decided its troops were living in squalid quarters, asked private developers to come in on base to build private housing. $30 billion came in at a fair return because there was a long-term customer there, right, those troops. When Michael Bloomberg left as mayor of New York, he was interviewed by the New York Times, and the reporter asked him, so now you get to go run your philanthropy, you're going to be able to put billions of dollars to work and really make a difference. He goes, inconsequential. It's nothing compared to the public purse. So it's how do we work with the government as an actor in the markets to help promote good social outcomes? And that's the critical aspect.
This move from centralized to decentralized systems, whether it's related to energy provision, wastewater treatment, food production, we haven't yet found kind of the plug-and-play models that you can just replicate quickly with larger flows of capital. But the flip side is that they're more likely to generate jobs that have local kind of persistence. And the story around green jobs, kind of certainly California documented what the solar energy development community has delivered in terms of green jobs.
Do you want to jump in on the public sector? Are we kidding ourselves, or should we?
No, I can't see how we're kidding ourselves when you realize that every government dollar that's spent, not just in public-private partnerships for investing, which is enormous, but every airport, every office building, if all of those long-term assets are not designed for a future that's 50 years out, that's fossil fuel free, then we as the citizenry are all voting for a future that doesn't work. That's a practical outcome. That's the part that we have to remember and I think walk into these discussions as citizens and as investors, that these things work.
I'd like to switch to the role of universities and university endowments. You have this very clear line between the operation of the university and this sort of bucket of money that's safely behind a big wall. And even something as simple as tapping into the university endowment to swap out the windows and caulk the doors, which has a positive return on investment with zero risk, was too hard. This gets to the investment mindset. The money is managed by one group and the operations of a university is separate. And the reason these schools are so well endowed is that's a lot of the inequality being recycled, ostensibly good purposes, back into society. So how can we open up that channel of investment flow?
Well, facts are a good thing. And the facts today are different than even 5 years or 10 years ago. What generation investment has proven is the argument is over. You can make money, you could be competitive, you can outperform and invest in responsible companies. They are not hurting their endowment. I would bet Michael tells us they're helping it by divesting from fossil fuels. Their fiduciaries, their board members, their investment officials are not going to make dumb decisions. The facts are showing us that you can make money without being invested in fossil fuels. That may have been harder to show 5 years or 10 years ago, but for a foundation that's spending an enormous amount of their time supporting climate work, for a university that's made a commitment to looking at social and environmental justice and issues, to not think their endowment is part of it. It is not just changing the light bulbs on campus. It is looking at the full picture, and the full picture includes your endowment. There are many things they can do that are not going to hurt their bottom line, whether it's investing and financing some of the campus changes, whether it's voting their proxies. If they're not divested yet, are they at least voting for shareholder resolutions? Old systems are hard to change. On campuses, we've got the perfect model. Students know how to push for change, and they ought to be doing it.
The unique opportunity for university endowments and foundations to play today to be a catalyst where the real money is flowing. So stepping back, how is critical infrastructure, which I put all of renewable energy in, but also clean water, also community facilities like rural hospitals and police stations, fire stations, and broadband, it's almost all debt financed. So there are three sources of debt that finance most of this critical infrastructure: non-transportation, transportation of the large bridges and roads, big projects. Everything else we term critical infrastructure. And it's the muni bond market, it's the U.S. government, which is all senior debt, and it's the farm credit system where special programs all senior debt. So either a project gets the money all in debt, or it doesn't get the money. And And that's today's world when you're trying to build a clean water facility or a solar facility or something that makes sense. How do you move those debt dollars? Even the USDA itself puts $30 billion a year into infrastructure. The Farm Credit System, $20 billion a year. The third source of capital is probably under $1 billion. So $50 billion a year out of the Farm Bill and the government-sponsored entity, the Farm Credit System, is building infrastructure. It can move to clean infrastructure if it were guided. There's no equity culture in rural America. It was just basically drowned out by the debt. So if a university endowment or a foundation want to really play a role, by putting up just a few $1 million, you could drive hundreds of millions into the right programs. If I were Dell Computer buying out, you go to Silver Lake, right? You go to the LBOs. So everything in corporate America or asset-based America is based on the equity sponsor driving the deal. Exactly opposite of most of this infrastructure. It's debt. It's lender-based. So a little bit of equity can change the trajectory. And that's why I think the role for the endowments and the foundations.
The students who are pushing for change and then where there is responsiveness and dialogue, the opportunities to roll out projects, efficient buildings, EV charging infrastructure, it's local energy generation, that it starts to show the way, and then people who previously might not have seen themselves as part of that future energy economy suddenly are in it because they're coming to the university. I think there's the power of kind of stumbling people into the changes that need to happen, and we spend a lot of time with endowments and institutions who are doing the work to understand risks and then positioning to the opportunity side. I think the risk work is the essential first step, but I like to shift the narrative more to opportunities.
My firm has this unique opportunity to be an advisory on impact investing at Oberlin, so I've spent a lot of time working with the chief investment officer here. In our world, there's this big debate that goes on in terms of investing between the direct investing, something, John, you push the private investing, the high impact where you can see that, and the public equity side and the municipal bond side where it's long-term change but a little harder to see. Champions are critical in college environments, that students taking action. Oberlin has used its endowment and its credit rating to finance something on the order of $80 million. You can divest, and Oberlin owns very little, if zero fossil fuels because it's not a very good asset class to own. You can use the power of your institution to make these kind of changes.
My name is Brenda Sinanj from the Alliance for Sustainable Colorado, and the estimate of about $20 trillion in sunk assets for the carbon bubble, and another estimate of $70 trillion for ecosystem services if they were fully valued. Could we create a strategy where we actually value those $70 trillion of ecosystem services to then sink the carbon bubble, keep that $20 trillion in the ground, and finance the transition to a clean energy economy using the value of ecosystem services?
The magnitude of this, you can't let one or two actors approach it. There has to be a holistic solution, and that means the government's going to have to be in place, just like it was in the financial crisis, right? There's no one institution that could survive. The government has to step up and support the system.
You've introduced the amazing complexity of this shift, and there is no bullet point answer to it. For the record, the 20 trillion of stranded assets is not all Exxon. It's Venezuela, it's Saudi Arabia, it's Iraq. It's in places that don't have an ability to respond just to losing their principal source of revenue. So there's a massive economic development challenge that goes with this transition that, interestingly, no one really is yet talking about.
You think sometimes stranded assets are assets in fossil fuel companies that can't be burned. But the reality is stranded assets are all around us. It's a utility system that isn't going to work because it was designed to push out power from a centralized. There's lots of poles and wires that aren't going to work. It's fossil fuel pipelines that aren't going to work. It's tankers that may not have a job. It's systemic, and it's not just these oil companies.
Fortunately, small amount of equity-based financing can go a lot farther than like a larger quantity of loan-based financing. And I don't understand, how can a much smaller amount, like a few million, create a lot more change than government-funded debt?
Most of rural America, where a lot of these infrastructure facilities are for clean energy, are really based around the lender saying, I'll give you $100 million to build that solar plant if you go find 5 or 10 million of equity. And the borrower goes, how do I find equity? I don't trust Wall Street. So For that $5 million of risk capital, 105 would go into the project. And of that 5, you could find a $1 million investor, because the way investment works, usually there's a lead investor, someone who does the work, who writes the memo, who runs the financial model. And if that $1 million investor does the work, he or she will find 4 more investors, each for $1 million, for the equity, and then the 100 of debt goes in. So that all goes into building clean energy. For $1 million, you could move over $100 million of assets.
My name is Joni Clark, and I'm a social architect and a media producer. The need here is a new story. How do we tell that new story and hit critical mass? When we create budgets for our next projects, that we put a filmmaking component, so everything gets documented, and we can share our successes.
Companies can sell products and services and make money, but also as advocacy businesses. I was involved on the board of 7th Generation, which was interestingly recently acquired by Unilever, and that company sees itself as a home care products business and an advocacy business.
Adam Lewis and David Orr, associate editor, and has been from the very beginning. It's a hybrid academic and popular magazine devoted to communicating some of the solutions out there. Our rule of thumb is that no more than a third of each article can be about describing the problem, 2/3 has to be about the solution. We encourage you to take a look. It's available for free online. Read about what's going on elsewhere, but I think contribute to some of the things that we've all been talking about here today.
As Californians, what can you guys do to advance the idea that because you have created a renewable economy, and what states are interested in you that are on their way?
Paris climate agreement from December of 2015. Governor Schwarzenegger was there. Governor Brown was there. I think half of California was in Paris. And I would tease people and say, what did you guys think about the Pennsylvania delegation? There was no Pennsylvania delegation in Paris. And when we met people from other countries from around the world, the 2 countries or states that were pushing really hard for clean energy and were succeeding economically were California and Germany. But people from around the world knew about the California story. It has reverberations beyond the 50 states of the United States. I think it's unrealistic not to recognize that fossil fuels are the biggest industry in the world. They make hundreds of billions of dollars. They would like to continue doing it, and they're going to push back. That's their right. That can't be the thing that stops us.
And when I became governor, I went to Chevron. And they said, hey, I need your help. And they said, what can we do for you?
When we ask Governor Schwarzenegger a question, he fixes you with this death glare.
And I said, what can we do for you? Now, of course, being a Republican, there was an advantage there because they didn't feel hostile when they walked in. I said, look, my vision is to have a hydrogen highway in California. That by the time I'm finished with my governorship, that I want to have enough fueling stations that a hydrogen-fueled car can drive up and down, left and right, east to west, whatever they want, and not run out of fuel. So I want to build enough fueling stations so that we eventually can get hydrogen-fueled cars to California, because I'm sick and tired hearing, well, we don't want to build hydrogen-fueled cars because there are no fueling stations. Or we don't want to place any fueling stations anywhere because there are no hydrogen-fueled cars. So I said, well, I want to start right away with the fueling stations. Can you help me? And Chevron said, yes, we're going to give you the space in our Chevron gas stations. We're going to go and give them a place where they can go and fuel up. And we have now 24 hydrogen fueling stations in California, enough that you can drive anywhere around. And now we're going to do the next thing, which is to go all the way up to Vancouver, bring them in and to make them understand that they should diversify with their investment. Invest in green energy, because this will be the energy of the future, and it will be smart investment for them also. Just attacking them and just villainizing them alone is not going to bring them in. You can fight them, but you can also negotiate them. And I was always in the belief that the more we make everyone part of the crusade, the faster we can win. Environmentalists, when they do a speech, that they always leave and say to people, here's 2 things that you can do. Because people walk away from environmental speeches, they don't know what to do. So you can say, go and set your thermostat. You can keep it cold the whole day in your apartment because you're at work, and you can set it on your iPhone. And then an hour before you go home, you set it again and you make it warm again. You can save so much energy that way. Serving energy. California is 40% more energy efficient because we have educated people. You can go into the kind of cars that you buy. 10 years ago, we couldn't get cars that were less than $100,000 that were electric cars. I bought one of the first Tesla cars. Well, I have $100,000 because for me that's petty cash. Someone else, it's a lot of money. They can afford $100,000. But today, there is 3-4 cars already that you can get for below $20,000. When you buy your next car, buy one of those fuel-efficient cars, those electric cars, so you can cut down on the pollution. Each and every one of us can participate in this environmental crusade.
I wonder if you agree with the governor's idea that you can do business with the oil companies.
I hope we can. I think that ultimately they will come around. Exxon's the biggest company in the United States, probably the biggest company in California. They are citizens of the United States who take seriously the notion of the safety and progress and prosperity of our country, including everybody, not just their bottom line. I do think that they are patriotic Americans. 2010 was a great experience because of the coalition of people across society who were in it. But we were fighting with 2 oil companies who were trying to do something against us. If they would come around and be part of it, we would be much stronger and faster moving to clean energy and saving ourselves in terms of climate change. And I am surprised when they do something that I think is in their interest, but against the interest of 320 million.
Your group is called Next Gen, and I wanted you to just talk a little bit about millennials and their attitude about climate generally. Is it universally supported?
People under the age of 35 are the largest age cohort of voters in America today, bigger than the baby boomers. 91% of them want to support candidates who want to move faster to clean energy. They've grown up knowing this is true. I have 4 kids between 22 and 28, so I spend a lot of time with people in this age cohort. There is a question in their mind about whether their vote counts, and whether the political system is responsive to young voters, whether our democracy is fully functional. Next Gen is on over 300 campuses in the swing states, talking on the issue of energy and climate, and trying to get them engaged in the system, and that our democracy only works if everybody participates. And as Governor Schwarzenegger and my friend George Shultz always says, democracy is not a spectator sport. This is an over 200-year experiment, and people have fought and died for that vote. If you don't vote, and if you don't have the right to vote, you will be treated completely differently.
I violently agree. I was the true outsider when I ran for governor. And to me, it was kind of like an eye-opener to see how fixed our political system is. For years and years and years, there was like 300 elections where no party changed hands. Democrats were locked in as Democrats, Republicans were locked in as Republicans, and nothing ever changed. They didn't actually have to do much because in a Republican district, a Republican could be challenged by a Democrat. And the same thing in a Democratic district, so it was fixed. That's the way they drew the district lines. So what we did in California was, again, an outsider, I declared war on the system. And I said, okay, from now on, we are not going to have the legislators that fix the political system draw the district lines. We let ordinary folks that are experts in that subject draw the district lines. And of course, we lost that initiative 4 times. Because both parties, Democrats and Republicans, fought me. Including Nancy Pelosi, that spent millions of dollars fighting us on this issue. And then the 5th time, we won. Because again, never give up and never listen to the naysayers. The next thing we did was, we go and we say, okay, now we're going to have open primaries. Well, that really rattled the cage, because that basically says, you're not going to have here a Republican primary and a Democratic primary, and the Democrats talk only about Democratic stuff and have to go more and more to the left in order to win, and the Republicans have to go more and more to the right to win, and then they're so far to the right and left that they can't get together in Sacramento. So that is no good. So let's have them both compete in the same stage. So So that the Republican candidate has to talk to Democrats and Republicans, and the Democrat has to talk to Democrats and Republicans. And all of a sudden everything changed. You know, the Republicans talk about immigration reform, and you have the Democrats talk about agreeing with the Chamber of Commerce. So everything now has changed in California that you can't really tell anyone apart, a Democrat or a Republican, because they had to come to the center. If we would have had nationwide that system, we would have two totally different candidates running the day for president.
And that's a different conference?
The country is so divisive, and it is part of this discussion about the environment, because people say, why is it that we cannot have an environmental policy in America? Why is it that we cannot have an energy policy? It's the only country in the world that doesn't really have an energy policy. We have no idea where we're going to get our energy. Is it going to be from oil? Is it going to be offshore drilling, onshore drilling, nuclear? Is it the renewables? What will be the renewable standard in 2020 or in 2030? We know nothing. It's improvisation. So we should have a specific policy nationwide, like we have a policy in California. We can do all that if the politicians get along, and if they work together, and if they don't see themselves as political hacks, but as actual public servants. You're supposed to be, when you go into office, to be a public servant, not a party servant. End of story.
Hi, I'm Hyacinth. I'm from San Francisco.
Hi, I'm Natalia. I'm from New York City.
How do you think that in the future we can negotiate differences and address the real issue of climate change and make it accessible to everyone?
And also on that note, how do you think that policy reform changes the public's view on climate change?
How can we end divisiveness on climate change? That the people of the United States actually make the decisions. And our goal has been to try to foster as much direct voter-to-voter conversation on energy and climate as possible. We believe that when the people of the United States agree with us, which actually everybody does regardless of party, and when they think it's urgent and important enough to vote on, we will win. This is something that is a generational challenge that faces all of us, and that we won't solve it unless we make the kind of national effort that we've made in regards to our biggest challenges for each generation, and that's what I think this is. This will be a national challenge like World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, the things where the people of the United States have to come together and decide this is the right thing to do together.
People have the ultimate power. Any important movement, if it was the anti-apartheid movement, or the women's suffrage movement to give women the right to vote, or the civil rights movement, or the independence movement, none of them came from any capital. They came from the groundwork, from ordinary folks. And they rise up, and they participated in those crusades, in those movements. And that's what then made the politicians respond to. And this is why it is so important for us to go and to really talk to the people, and to let them know you don't have to worry about your job when you go green. In Ohio, it's a perfect example. You produce coal. You have some of the most extraordinary coal miners here in this state. So you don't go to a coal miner and say, we're going to shut down your coal mine and you're going to lose your job and you're out of the industry. But you have to have a vision. You have to go to the coal miners and say, instead of producing coal and sending you down 1,300 feet to inhale dust and have lung cancer, we're going to go in instead, produce factories for you and switch you over from coal mining to producing solar panels. But we're never going to let you be unemployed or lose a job. So it's America. We landed a man on the moon. We have done such unbelievable things. And I, as an immigrant, have seen it firsthand. And I can appreciate it. So I think we can leave this problem too. I will never give up. I think all we have to do is communicate and communicate. And I am the first one to know how long that takes. 40 years ago, I said bodybuilding is a great thing to pump up. They said, no, this is terrible. It will give you a heart attack and you will get to become gay and narcissist. And you will get muscle cramps and you will get stiff and muscle bound. Today, every athlete is training with weights. There's more health clubs. Every hotel has a gymnasium. There's more health magazines being sold than ever before, more food supplements being sold than ever before. So the crusade, the fitness crusade worked. And the same will happen to the environmental crusade. And we're going to fight and make it happen.
My name is Mr. Paul Janis. My wife and I, we are local citizens here in Oberlin. I'd like to say, first of all, thank you, Mr. Schwarzenegger, for coming to Oberlin. I've heard a lot today about chemical pollution and communication. Unfortunately, nobody has brought up the Nexus gas pipeline. Our local paper has reported, Mr. Schwarzenegger just brought up fitness gyms. The pipeline will go right past our splash zone. It was originally supposed to go 10 to 15 miles outside of town. And the paper also reported that the discharges from the pipe can contaminate the groundwater. I'd like to know why this hasn't been addressed today, because it is a very important matter.
In a situation where we need to move to renewable energy in general. When you think about investment, you're investing for 50 years. And the real question that I ask in every single fossil fuel investment is, does it really make sense to build infrastructure for the next 50 years that we may not be able to use? Is that a good use of money? As somebody who is a professional investor for 30 years, once you've spent a couple of $1 billion, you are going to fight like crazy to try and make sure that you get to use it for 50 years. So I don't have a good answer for you on this specific pipeline because I don't know the facts. But I do know that we have to take our investment dollars and shift them to a completely different place. We have to stop investing in fossil fuel-based infrastructure that's going to hold us back. The amount of renewables in Ohio is 4%. That's where it is. Why are we spending more money on infrastructure that is going to prevent us from making the move instead of infrastructure that is going to enable us to make the move?
I think it's important to know for everyone that there is a pipeline already existing. So this wouldn't be anything new, except they want to straighten out the pipeline. Instead of going like this, they want to go and create a straight, in that particular area, a straight pipe. I'm always suspicious of anything when it comes to oil and potential pollution that it can create. So therefore, I would never let anything be built until there is really extensive environmental study done. I don't know how much has been done or not. And to make sure 100% there are no leaks and there's no damage to any neighborhood in that area. Then if I can see that, then we can talk about it. But like Tom said, then we also have to look at it, is it really from an investment point of view the right thing to do?
Second important question.
Thank you very much, thank you. I will sign your Conan DVD.
Hello everyone, I'm Dusan, an international Oberlin student, and I would like. So many immigrants, they have dreams to come to live in the United States. How will new climate policy affect immigration policy? How do you think that they are related? And I would love to ask that Mr. Schwarzenegger, because I'm coming from Serbia, the country of Nikola Tesla, who was an immigrant here, and he created light for the entire world.
For people that come to the United States, the more important it is to have renewables and to get off fossil fuels, because everyone that comes here and such something in a car that goes 20 miles per gallon is going to create more and more pollution. So this is why I very strongly suggest that we go and switch over to cars that are hydrogen-fueled cars, hybrid cars, or electric cars, so that we get off fossil fuels slowly over the next 20 years. I'm welcoming all the immigrants to come over here because I can see, and I'm talking about legally, coming over here. I'm an immigrant that has come over here. I think it was the greatest move that I've ever made. And it was the greatest day when I became an American citizen in 1983. None of it that I've accomplished would I have been able to accomplish if it wouldn't be for America. I could have gone to any other country in the world. Doesn't matter if it's the Middle East, or Africa, or anywhere in Europe, or in Asia, Australia, doesn't matter where, or South America. America was really the place that gave me the opportunities. It is, even though we have our problems, we have serious problems, But with all the problems, it is still by far the best country in the world.
This has been a conference on moving away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. There's been very, very little discussion of engineering. It's been almost entirely a social and political discussion. The engineering is complicated. And given the scale of what's in front of us, those are back-of-the-envelope calculations from the standpoint of transportation, food system, industrial processes. We have an enormous challenge ahead of us. But what's important is that we get started and that we all get on the same page. In the end, we don't know what a post-fossil fuel world will look like. Energy transitions are complicated, they're messy, and they're transformative. Think of the move from hunting and gathering to agriculture, the move from agrarian societies to the fossil-fueled industrial world of the 20th century. These were transformative transitions that impacted everything, the economy to people's religious and philosophical views of themselves and their place in the universe. We can't really hope to know exactly what this is going to look like when we're finished. What we can know at this point is the necessity of moving ahead, because if we don't, we will get to some kind of future, given the finite nature of fossil fuels. But if we don't move ahead deliberately and together to develop renewable energy now, it's not going to be a future any of us would want to live in. Reform the economy in ways that work for everyone, that we could solve a lot of problems at once. We are living at the end era, the fossil fuel era, and when eras die, it's messy. So there are going to be contradictions.
I work in the field of largely community and economic development. How does what we're talking about connect on the ground? And I live on the east side of Cleveland. My neighborhood is 98.5% African American. The median household income for a family of 4 in Glenville is $18,000. About 40% of my neighbors live below the poverty line. I've been involved in starting a network of green worker cooperatives to provide employment for people like my neighbors, called the Evergreen Cooperative. You know, we made them green to start with, save water and good utilization of energy and the products to be natural and healthy and all of that. And we did it as a business proposition because our major customers were going to be big hospitals and universities, and they're all trying to become greener. So we wanted to be able to say, if you do business with Evergreen, look how much you can accomplish on your own internal sustainability goals. But I didn't really think about when we built these companies as greenest in their sector, that it would really make much difference to the people we were hiring. After all, what they want are jobs. They want income. They want their family to get ahead. And I'll never forget one of the first people we hired. And I asked him, what did this job mean to you? And he didn't talk about the income. He didn't talk about the benefits and the health care. They said, you know, a couple of years ago when I got out of prison, I started hearing about green jobs. And so I went to the library because I don't have a computer, and I Googled for green jobs. And I concluded I was going to have to leave Cleveland and move to Portland, Oregon, because that's the only place there were green jobs as far as I could tell. And so to be in a company where every day I can go and make a difference on the environment in my community is the thing that really turns me on about this. I think we tend to think that maybe you have to be college educated on the ground in communities everywhere, even when people are struggling to meet their basic human needs. These issues are essential.
We're in a horse race with catastrophe. Good news is we're in the race. California's starting to do it. 10 times the number of jobs being generated from clean energy than from the whole rest of their economy. I'm going to argue we as a movement, and as people who think about these issues, care about these issues, we don't know how to win. We spend a lot of time fighting against something
And we know how to lose. We lose all the time. Dave Brower used to say, our victories are temporary, our losses are forever. We don't know how to win, and we haven't imagined what winning will look like, feel like. We don't own it. It's not our passion that we're fighting for something that we know anything about. So here's one challenge to y'all. Start thinking about what it would be to win. What would it feel like? What would it look like when you walk out? I wanted to ask Tom and Arnold, will you make a movie about winning? We got lots of movies about how awful it's going to be, years of living dangerously. What about winning? We lack a theory of change. How does change happen? And there are examples through history of change happening. 12 men and 1 woman met in a print shop in London and ended slavery. Took them 80 years, but they ended the institution that underpinned the economy of the British Empire globally. Sun never set on the British Empire then. And they ended it for moral reasons. There's a lot we can learn from history, from our own movements, the anti-Vietnam War or Earth Day. Why did it change? Who did what? And what can we learn and what will we do? We do know that the other side, the neoliberal agenda, set a narrative. They then, in the Powell Memorandum, and again, go read the Powell Memorandum. Google it, get it, read it. It will chill you to recognize, he said 26 targets, went after every darn one of them. And that is why we have the world we have today. They set the narrative, they set the strategy, and they got the funding. These 5, 6 entities, big foundations, put something like $5 million apiece for each of 5 years into endowing Hudson, Heritage, Hoover, American Enterprise, Cato, Manhattan Institute, Heartland Institute. These are the entities we have been fighting ever since. They built a movement where the leading people did not have to spend all damn day long begging for money. They are effective. Our movement consistently paralyzes our best and our brightest because we have to go begging for money. Until we look at how people did it in the past, how they won, we're going to keep on losing. Envision winning and make it your own, make it your passion. Join us in this conversation about what is a narrative of an economy in service to life. We're online. It's a thing called Leading for Wellbeing. If you can't find it, write me, call me, Natural Capitalism Solutions, napcapsolutions.org. We're going to try to take this conversation global using the best of modern technology so that we can crowdsource opinions, money, and capacity. And so that we can start sharing successes. We're really good at producing a lot of data. Mark Cavanelli has a theory of change. There are 50 financiers of the fossil fuel industry, and he's going to produce the data that is meaningful to them to get them to change what it is they're doing. Let's start aggregating these theories of change. How do we do it at the local level? How do we do it at the political level? How do we do it in academia? Let's win.
Building from the ground up is part and parcel of building the movement. And building institutions, whether they be small businesses are growing, whether they're co-ops, land trusts, these are the institutional basis of a movement. It's not just attitudes, and it's not just politics, and it's not just culture. I worked for Gaylord Nelson, the founder of Earth Day. Gaylord was a conservation governor. He became an environmental movement leader and later an ecological development leader. That's the progression, moving from one level of thinking to another level of thinking, and then on to a much broader conception of what the system was about. But the institutional base is critical in all this. With the best of the environmental legislation, was enacted with support of people who had the labor movement behind them, who we fight on many battles. Gaylord Nelson was a labor lawyer. You couldn't get him elected to do environmental work without the institutional power of the labor unions. Movements run on two legs. They run on movement power and attitude and culture, but also on institutions. And I think the most exciting thing that's happening now is the development of institutional power. Partly it's small business. Partly it is the co-op movement. Partly it's the new economy movement. Partly it's the development in land trust. Partly it's development in other culture, the Black Power movement. There is a beginning development both of attitudes and slowly of alternative ideas about institutions. And I think that's the piece that is weakest so far. But it is developing below the surface of a form we call it community wealth building, but it is community-based. It begins to generate a whole different way of being and power. Movements do not move without institutions that really want to move to that level. Two levels that I think we haven't yet addressed. We've said almost nothing about what you do about the big power block corporations that are blocking it. They beat us every time so far. And we haven't talked about that directly and straight up, how to get at that. And we suggested that one of the things, and here's where the timetable comes in, time is not our friend. The big oil companies know that the value of their reserves are going down as the movements grow around the world. They know that they're in trouble. On the other hand, they're in a resistance mode. Buying them out is mainly a political effort. They get them out of the way because they're blocking everything. That's a very new and difficult and controversial notion. It may be you can do it through the investors. That possibility I'm skeptical of, but convincing some of the investors on those boards to get in there and start getting them out of the way. But they're standing as a major political bloc. Our politics nationally is not California's politics. The base is different. We have big blockages in Washington, and they're institutional power blockages. That hasn't been discussed much here, and I think we're going to have to open up a very big discussion on that front. There is a time dimension on this one, and it's not the same as movement building. Are there any ways to move hot and fast on that one? We'll see. We need to look at ourselves about this, about the developing world. Very little said at this conference about the implications of all this for countries that are trying to get above the hunger level. They need energy, they need an energy transformation, they need it fast, and we have not addressed that at all in any of the discussions so far. That's a major area for much greater thought and development that we really need to work on.
We've heard a lot about the importance of success stories, and Arnold Schwarzenegger was actually saying how it was so important that we have messages of hope. And I was wondering if any of you know about the study about motivated avoidance. It states that most people, if they hear about an environmental problem and it seems so troubling and traumatic and intractable, that they push it away and they go into denial. Maybe the reason that so many of the people are in denial. I wonder if you knew about this, about motivated avoidance. And then, well, how to counter that. And what you were saying, Hunter, about the importance of success stories. I'm the producer of these Young Voices for the Planet success stories, youth solutions to the climate crisis. And my question is, we have these institutions in place. We have Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, all kinds of institutions. And these young people, they talk to their parents. And through history, young people have really been the ones who moved their parents. So can you talk to that about how in your work you've seen young people, or the role of younger people, not even next gen, but even younger, in getting to their parents because they talk about the future and the importance of survival on the planet.
My kids and my grandkids are around me all the time about this, and they're off in Pennsylvania right now trying to stop. Maybe we stop the danger coming from the other party. But they're out there now voting and trying to make sure that somehow we don't end up with a disaster at the national level. So that it's been pushing me hard. So that's where I see it up front.
I matter. Google I matter. Young people against climate change, youth against climate change. There are growing numbers of young people's movements, and we ought to be telling their stories as well.
Something that you said really
stuck with me. We're talking worldwide what we need to do, and I've heard figures 29 trillion, 40 trillion, the $90 trillion. Yeah. I would encourage anyone here in this room, and this really resonates with the young people, check out this app. It's called gridwatch.ca, and they track Canada, Ontario, Canada, and their electrical generation, which is 85% to 90% carbon-free. Carbon-free, totally. I looked at it this morning. They're generating 16,000 megawatts of electricity, carbon-free. And you can track, you can go to, you can see all the plants, and there's wind, there's solar, there's hydro, there's biofuel, there's gas plants. And if you look at the gas and the wind turbines, they work together. So when the wind turbines are spinning, the gas goes down. When the wind turbines aren't spinning, of course, the gas goes up and everything. But they use nuclear power as a base load, and it's in 3 locations. But take a look at it, because it's a real-world situation just like France. And what do you all think about the real success stories?
Well, nuclear is a dying industry. You can argue about whether or not we keep running the ones that we have, many of which are just really dangerous. Next accident, and any of them around the world, they'll all shut down. There will be a next accident. The fuel cycle of nuclear is not carbon-free. If you count the entire fuel cycle, it's about the same as natural gas. I can show you the numbers on that. But tracking what different countries are doing who are switching to renewables is a good thing to do. It's one of those success stories.
I just wanted to share in regards to good news. I'm the good news bearer from China. So if you go to solarvalleychina.com, there's a city called Deshuo, 7 million people that use renewables to heat their water. And then also they actually have 100% of the lights. And I'm just here as a bridge for me to offer to all of you as you're thinking about doing all these beautiful dreams. My business partner is willing to share the technology. He's very busy trying to save China. And also to do the healing and apologies for every person that ever did not do good as a Chinese person. Just know that there's a whole group of people that are very good, including my business partner, Wang Ming. So we are absolutely committed to sharing this technology with all of you. He's been doing it for 20 years. So we're going to build villages, so we're going to build cities. He has it already, and thank you for that.
Thank you to our panel. Thank you very much.